Good afternoon, everyone. I know it's always challenging to be the last program, particularly in the afternoon. But I got a strong panel behind me, so it's a real honor to be, here to moderate this interesting, exciting session. First of all, my friend, Dr. Ni Yan, due to last-minute business urgency, cannot make this conference. So he called me and asked me to do this for him because he's a personal friend of mine. I cannot say no. Yeah. We got a strong panel here. Instead of myself to introduce each of them, I think it's better to let them to, tell us about themselves because, like all of you, I just get to know them, for example, Dr. Hensman, I just met him just 1 minute ago. Okay, so could you please go ahead?
Okay. Well, hello, everyone, and I would like to share your opinion about welcoming everyone in this last session. We try to make it interactive, so please also do participate. For my own background, I've been 28 years in the pharmaceutical industry, of which I spent the last 22 years in Asia Pacific. My background is in oncology, and I have covered functions from drug development, clinical operations, and medical affairs, and a little bit of regulatory work. I have lived 16 years in Singapore, 3 years in Malaysia, 2 in Korea, and 1 in Hong Kong. So I think I have a fairly broad experience, and I'm happy to share my opinion, but these are my personal opinions. These do not reflect those opinions of my employer at the moment.
Thank you very much. Hello, my name's Helen Neal. I've been in a clinical environment now for 27 years. Most of that time I've been working within the CRO industry with small episodes working within large pharma. That experience has encompassed clinical operations, project management, and for most of the last 5 years I've been working in Asia Pacific.
Thank you. Thanks, Dr. Mu. I'm Shashidhar Rao. From a background, I'm an anesthesiologist, and having practiced anesthesiology for a few years, I switched tracks into the pharma industry. So I've been with the industry for about 11 years now in a variety of roles, including medical publishing and in the BPO environment, and now recently in the clinical development and medical affairs, currently with Novartis. So thanks a lot. It's a pleasure being here.
Thanks, everyone. So everybody can see, for our panel, we got a very diverse background, from clinical operation, clinical science, and medical affairs. I know traditionally we talk about, those we're going to discuss 3 topics, and traditionally those are fell into strictly in the clinical operations arena. But as everybody knows, clinical operation, clinical science, medical affairs, that clear separation is gone. Now we're talking about a completely integrated approach. And for this panel discussion, I hope we can have a very dynamic, interactive discussion. So as a moderator, I hope I can just be a facilitator to, as I said at the beginning, I pretty much rely on this strong panel. I don't know if we have slides to post those, 3 topics or not. If not, maybe we can mention about those. The first one is about from the previous speakers. We talk about that clinical development is a critical component of the entire drug development, and there are many important decisions to make. And one of the key decisions is if we want to go in-house or outsourcing, and how much in terms of the proportion and what timing. And so as I said, now it's with the integrated drug development, this is not only an operational question, but it's also part of the overall strategy. So I would like to invite the first panelist, Dr. Hensman, to share your thoughts on this.
Well, I think there is not a one-size-fits-all solution. I think for the medium to large size multinational companies, it is always good to keep a fair share of in-house resources, and I will elaborate later a little bit why I think so. Whereas for the really small startup, niche or biogen companies with highly fluctuating workload, it could very well make sense to outsource 100%. But let me explain where I see advantages of an in-house and later an outsourced model. I think in Asia we all realize that building relationships is very important, and your relationship starts usually with clinical development, because whoever is your investigator is later your advocate when it comes to registration, reimbursement, and possibly also a good prescriber of your drug. And having a certain in-house control of that relationship, I think, is very important, so that the investigator or later KOL would not only remember a CRO name, but knows the company that stands behind the product. That is probably the most important factor. And building an in-house expertise in a specific therapeutic areas, building in-house knowledge among your staff, and a certain career path and development opportunities, I think are additional advantages that I have seen, and I have worked with 100% in-house and with 100% outsourced model. So I've gone through every extreme. Now, I do not agree necessarily that cost is higher with an in-house model. I actually have seen quite a few cases where you can really make use of your in-house resources at lower cost than what it would cost you if you outsource. And never forget, all the outsourced companies are profit-oriented companies. So at the end of the day, they may have to charge a premium. And in my experience, the attrition rate is also lower with the in-house model, because I think staff turnover in CRO is still a certain issue. Now, talking about the advantages of an outsourced model, I would say that you can buy directly into an established network of investigator and experienced trial sites, especially if you're new to a country or new to a therapy area. You also gain access to expertise in terms of trained staff and familiarity with regulations. At least that's what the contract partner usually claims they have. They actually say that the timelines can be shorter if you work with them. I haven't necessarily seen it everywhere, but there is definitely some case to be made for that. And you have the advantage that you can work with partners much better if you have a highly fluctuating workload, or if you even don't have any business presence in a particular country. Like if you're a startup or a company that just builds a presence in Asia. So these, I would say, are the advantages of going with an outsourced model. Now, in contrast to the previous speaker, I have yet to be convinced of the embedded model, because I would still have the infrastructure cost, I would still have a lot of other costs, and like I said, I see that they must make money, so somewhere there must be a markup. So I'm not necessarily seeing the cost advantage of the fully embedded model. It's something that has gained a lot of favor, in my opinion, for Wall Street, because they look at profit per employee, and if you cut the number of in-house or FTEs, obviously that number goes up and you look good on Wall Street and your share price goes up. But whether you really gain the efficiency, gain any cost advantage, I think you create actually a two-class of employee, ones that are FTEs, ones that are in the embedded group. Whether that is really the best solution, I still question that, and that's again my personal opinion.
Helen, do you want to add your perspective?
I think it very much depends on what you want to achieve in any particular project, that decision. And you need to undertake an in-depth analysis of your own capability and capacity when making the decision to keep work in-house or take it outsourced. And I think with the increasing complexity of trials and the need to reach some of those markets where you may not have infrastructure, you do need to look at a tailored model and thinking about a country-by-country approach.
Well, in my experience, whatever I've seen, I think the decision, if you look at where the decisions happen, whether to outsource or insource, funnily or not, the decision actually gets made by the chief financial officer. Hardly have I seen the the decision percolate down to the function heads who decide whether to take it out or keep it inside. Given the Wall Street's or Street's focus on revenue per FTE or revenue per associate or return on assets, you will have a pressure on how many people you have within your company. So that's one major decision that goes in favor of outsourcing certain activities. So the thought process that goes on in the leader's mind would be, what's the best use of my headcount? And they will invest in that headcount which they think is the best use. So whatever you might call it, strategic headcount, FTE doing strategic work, which is much more decision-making, is kept in-house, and the rest is outsourced. That might be true for bigger companies, but smaller companies, I agree with Dr. Katzman, it's where the workload is totally not predictable. It's better to go with a vendor or a CRO partner, which helps you do that. Having said that, now, it also, again, my personal opinion is also, as long as we believe that we have the functional expertise to do every task that has been assigned and the time to do it, we generally go in with an in-house model. Again, my personal opinion is the bandwidth of the leaders who take the decision whether to outsource or not. If I understand a task, why shouldn't I hire and expand my empire? Humans want to expand their empires. So why not I just go ahead and hire people and have greater and better budgets and manage them? So again, it comes down to whether the leaders do have an appreciation for the finesse that a task involves, and do they understand what the task involved is. So if I look at my own decision-making mindset, anything that I don't understand as a leader, I outsource. Just to, throw the ball a little open, probably being a little provocative. So that's the way there are a few points that I thought I would share.
From our panel, it's clear that it's not a question about in-house versus outsourcing, or in-house or no in-house, or outsourcing, no outsourcing. It's about how much or when, how to tailor with the company's overall strategy. So in terms of implementation, the specific approach, it looks like different companies has different consideration, and that's consistent with our topic. That there's no single model or no single size fits all, right? I live on both sides of the world. I used to work for big pharma, big biotech for many years. And now, moving back to China, working with a smaller company, although it's a leading biotech company, but by size is still quite small, about 200 scientists. So one of the areas I would like to mention about it is, in the early stage development, when I moved back to Asia, I found that it's actually very difficult to find a good outsourcing. Historically, big pharmas don't do, until now, they're still not allowed to do first-in-human trial in Asia, in China. So early development is pretty much in the premature or the early stage. But things are changing. I saw a lot of very positive signs. So I would like, from a sponsor's perspective, make a public plea that is, for CROs, vendors, please pay attention. This could be a future fast-growing area. That's an early research or early development area. Yeah. Okay.
Previous points, I think the breadth of opinion talks to the benefit of having open discussions as partners earlier in the process than we have done historically, where, as you say, it's been a black or white in-source or outsource, where I think we should look at the strengths of both organisations and talk to each other openly earlier in the process, and build that relationship to identify the best solution, for any given programme.
Yeah, I think I'd like to add a point here. There are a couple of other decisions which I thought I'd just mention here, and alluding to a previous speaker, that some decisions are made based on our understanding of geographies as well. So as the world becomes more flatter, and as we move more into markets which are much more tempting to the big pharma, or even for smaller biotechs and small pharma as well, I think the understanding of the geographical landscape also influences the mindset of whether to keep things in-house or outsource. Not knowing a market is definitely a reason why people would like to outsource and get a partner who knows the markets very well. And whether to be in the market itself is a decision that needs to be made in the first place, but these are a couple of areas which, again, runs from a leadership mindset point of view, saying that, hey, I need to be in that market, and if I need to be in that market, what is it that I need to do in that market to establish my presence? So again, referring back to Dr. Katzman's point on maintaining your relationships with the investigators on a first-hand basis and not letting maybe someone else come in between that relationship, these decisions get made based on our comfort with the geography as well.
Now let's see, the company has decided to go with a significant, outsourcing or using outsourcing to play a major part of the overall development, program. So the next question is how to select, the outsource, how to handle it, specifically on the CRO selection. Traditionally, big pharma, particularly in the registration stage, prefer to use a global major or full service CRO, to handle all the major work. I think that model is changing, right? So, Dr. Rao, would you please provide your thoughts on this?
Yes, I think a lot has been said about a single versus multiple partner model or a vendor model or a CRO model. At least in my mind, there's nothing called a single CRO model. Given the complexities of clinical development in today's time, it's next to impossible to have a single CRO model. That's why I think the term preferred partners are being used. It's just preferred. It's not that it's mandated. Hey, look at my cell phone. It has millions of parts done by millions of suppliers. It's never going to happen that a single partner will give you everything that you want. And I think leadership recognizes that, and the clinical development leadership right across the pharmaceutical companies recognizes that. I think, again, it comes back to some of the points that how comfortable are you with your sourcing team's capability of managing this multiple relationship? I think that's something that drives single versus multiple partners. Do you want essentially, what are you doing when you go with a single CRO partner? What you do is that you take your responsibilities and give it to that partner and say, hey, please run it for me. And then the single CRO partner then goes and does multiple subcontracts and delivers for you. So it's more about a relationship, trust, and responsibility dynamic that determines whether you have a single CRO versus a multiple CRO partner. That's been my experience. Of course, there are other things which will drive whether you go into a model. There's a lot of focus on R&D productivity. There is a lot of focus on getting your development costs down. So as you get the development costs down, you tend to put all your eggs in one basket and then squeeze that basket. So what happens is that you say that, okay, let me go with a single vendor. I hopefully will get the best cost out of that, and so that I can show to my shareholders that, look, my productivity is going up and my R&D costs are coming down. Probably that's one of the mindset that, again, is at work.
Yeah. I think you have to distinguish, is it a truly global project that you're talking about, or is it more a regional or local project? I think for really, let's say, a large phase 3 global registration trial, there is a strong argument to be made to try to go with one global CRO. There are not many truly global CROs, as you pointed out. A lot do actually subcontract in certain countries, but there are now more and more companies, big European or American CROs have expanded into this part of the world over the last 3-5 years, and there are at least 5, I would say, truly global CROs to choose from. And hopefully they have not just bought a local CRO, but truly built an expertise on the ground. But for regional or local projects, I think you should show flexibility if you decide to go outside your own company, because you may have a tailor-made solution at a lower cost. But on a global level, dealing, let's say, with 50 countries, 50 different CROs, 50 different contracts, it would be a nightmare from an administrative point. And you wouldn't gain any efficiencies, which probably a global CRO could deliver and pass on some of the cost savings to you. That would be, in a nutshell, my opinion. See first what is the scope of the project and then decide on your strategy. again, coming back to you, look at it on a tailored individual case-by-case scenario rather than a general approach.
I would agree with Dr. Katzman in that I think you need to look at the size and scale of the project to then work out where the best partners would be to help you achieve your objectives. If you have got a single country small project, then the all singing, all dancing global CRO may not be the best fit for that. And referring back to an earlier point, around the relationships piece, particularly in some of the smaller countries that are newer to clinical research, that key relationship with the local CRA that's in position, that knows the institution, could be really critical to the success and the delivery of that trial in that environment. But on the flip side of that, if you've got 45 countries, a large number of patients, very demanding timelines, then clearly minimizing the administrative pieces and the moving parts would assist, to give you better project management and oversight for delivery on time.
Yeah, so also, from a sponsor perspective, I think, many sponsors would like to see great flexibility. Ideally, when we pick a global CRO, we would like that it's a perfect CRO, strong in all the major areas, right? But in reality, we know that's impossible. So from a sponsor perspective, we have to identify the priority areas, right? Based on the priority to pick the ideal CRO, and hopefully in some area, companies consider using secondary CRO to supplement. In this way, combining, you can get a very strong, outsourcing to help you to realize your overall strategy.
I mean, one additional point, we all think that if we go with a global CRO, we are very powerful, we can squeeze them a little bit, ask for the most experienced CRAs. Let's be realistic, every client is doing that, How many experienced CRAs does this CRO have? And you have to give that CRO also a chance to grow CRAs from a junior to an experienced level. So sooner or later you'll find yourself in a situation where you have to work with less experienced CRAs. There is no such thing as every CRA is experienced. You come from the CRO industry, I'm sure you can subscribe to that opinion. I think we should be realistic about what to expect and not try to expect the impossible from a CRO.
I appreciate that very much. Certainly, yes, you're right. I think coming from a CRO, we always like to provide the best qualified staff for any given project that that we're given to conduct. But I think again, with emerging markets and particularly with some of the lesser experienced or immature countries, we need to be realistic about the extent of experience you may find in the CRA talent pool within that country, and identify that not all the sites. In addition to the CRAs, the sites may not have great depth of experience as well. So it's trying to make the best fit and the best match for the project in any given territory, and try and be transparent with the client in terms of manage expectations. Going back to that really frequent and positive communication that you can maintain with the client as you go through the project.
Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I agree with most of the points. So I think it depends entirely on the situation at hand that a company needs to decide. How does it want to play its particular challenges ahead? And there are, I think, benefits of having a multi-model versus a single model. And again, as I said, that it depends on what kind of complexity of the particular program that's been running or that's been defined as important for that particular company. That will decide eventually whether it has to be given to A or B or kept it partially in-house. I think that's probably my take on this at this point in time.
Yeah, so let's move on. So the last topic that is, as we know, clinical trials are very critical components of the development program. As we know, there are also, on the other hand, they're subject to many, risks, or challenges, or issues, like, from a financial perspective, study management perspective, and at the end of the day, what about the integrity of the data? If after spending that much money and time, the integrity of data is compromised, then we have nowhere to go, right? So, Helen, I know you have many years of experience in managing clinical operations. Can you share your experience in this area? That is how to manage various risks, deal with all kinds of challenges associated with those key areas in clinical operations. Yeah.
Sure. I think just to echo Janet's points from the previous presentation, I think we've seen a great evolution in how we manage clinical data, and the actual act of monitoring has changed significantly from when I first started monitoring some years ago. I think in terms of quality, we've obviously got a real challenge to meet high expectations in terms of quality and integrity of the data against very tight fiscal controls. Our partners and customers are under increasing financial pressure to deliver the same trial, high volume of patients, larger number of countries, but with an even smaller budget than we previously anticipated. With that in mind, it becomes increasingly important that quality is not an activity separate belonging to auditors or the QA department. It has to be part of what everybody's involved in, and has to be centre of everyone's focus, whether you're working at the site as a CRA or whether you're working as a manager overseeing the trial or as one of the medical experts contributing to decisions around country selection. It's central to everyone's activities. Now, with the increasing volume of data that becomes available for us to review in the variety of systems that are available to us, either through CRO systems or through our client systems, we have to take a realistic approach, but a very focused approach to make sure we're looking at the right data and evaluating that for any risks with regards to quality. So with that, we see an evolution further in the monitoring process to move towards risk-based monitoring and utilizing data, real data from our experience with sites previously, the data query rates, issues arising from ECRFs. All these technologies now can really give us very strong indicators as to the site's ability to provide data with good integrity. And I think we need to, as an industry, we need to really leverage that technology now to our advantage so that we can focus on quality and make a fundamental shift in how we monitor the data.
I think in general, for the clinical development programs, there are some of the key factors or key components, which requires us a lot of efforts. For example, cost or cost and control, speed, how quickly we can go. At the end of the day, the data quality, and sometimes those different factors that can be conflicting, to each other. So how do you handle those seemingly conflict and to put a more balanced way and to have overall very integrated and maintain the high integrity of the study? So Dr. Kensman.
I think cost should never be the overriding primary factor, even though it is probably in everyone's back of the mind. But I think quality is still ultimately the deciding factor, because without good quality data, let's be honest, we won't be able to register the drug, we won't be able to sell it. So quality for me is number one, and obviously sometimes it means you would have to compromise on cost, do a co-monitoring, more frequent visits or whatever, make use of technology. I think that is one area, and I agree with one of the earlier speakers, technology is not yet fully utilized to its best extent within clinical development. I think there is still a huge area where we can gain productivity or cost savings out of it. And really never compromise quality. I've seen that so many times, and it always hits you back, you know. You want to cut corners, do it other ways, but don't do it in clinical development.
I'd say one of the other pieces is that as a CRO, it's very important to glean information that you do learn as you go through the trials and make sure that's fed back to the teams very promptly, so that if you do identify any issue early in a trial, that you're updating the monitors, you're updating the managers, the project manager is disseminating that information not only across the sites within one country, but as applicable across countries and then maybe across protocols, so that you can prevent recurrence of any issues. And how agile an organisation can be to manoeuvre that information through and make sure that the training's understood and implemented at site in terms of monitoring activity. And with the advent of corrective and preventative action plans that are actually not just a document that's completed post-audit, that it's a living, breathing activity that's part of everyday operations and not just seen as a post-audit activity.
And just taking from Helen's point, that the point that I wanted to add was that whatever, again, I've seen from a financial and quality risk that I run, if you do an RCA, whenever you have these issues that have happened, I've seen it comes down to communication. Plain and simple communication, and the engagement model that we set, whether within the companies or sponsors that we work, or with a sponsor, with a vendor, or within the vendor's company. But it comes down to ineffective communication. Either the training was not imparted when it was supposed to be imparted, the information flow did not flow when the risk was identified and before becoming an issue. So there are some things which are not under your control. Well, the science changes, can't help it, and requires a new way of looking at the entire program. Fine, that's a risk we run, which is much more beyond control. How much you might say that it is a very specific risk, but at least the systematic risk can be reduced with a proper communication engagement framework that you can put in place. And that's one factor I've seen which could lead to substantial de-risking when it comes to finance and the quality. Of course, on the broader picture, there are ways of reducing a financial risk. If you look from an entire program point of view, getting the right stakeholders involved early on. Of course, if you say the regulators need to get their ad boards aligned early on to get inputs into a company's sponsor's protocol or a program design, and the sponsor company needs to have all its stakeholders aligned. For example, have the health economists on board really early on the program, so that you could say go, no go, so your financial risk comes down. And the finance guys are happy with whatever data you supply as the potential risk of a program failure. So again, it's a communication of these methodologies internally as well as externally, which will go in a long way. Systems processes are there, and believe me, they're all there. Starting from a simple Word document to an Excel sheet, we all have it. The issue is, how do we transmit it? At least one thing I've learned over the last few years in the positions of responsibility I've been is the moment you see a risk, escalate. Just go ahead and tell the world that there is a risk. And of course, then there'll be other things that you follow up, but one thing we don't do well is communicate that risk.
And I think just talking to that point a little bit more with regards to escalation, I think when we work in more complex models, it's even more important to make sure that we don't just take an escalation plan off the shelf, that we actually make sure that we are including all the relevant stakeholders in the organisations and vendors that are involved, and making sure everyone's aware of their responsibilities and who they should be talking to.
Yeah, I think I couldn't complete more, and is that because industry-wide, when you look at development programs, they're getting more and more sophisticated and more complex, because even a lot of development programs or joint development programs, we're talking about more than one company. Even within only one company, there are many stakeholders that, like, Helen, you mentioned that every stakeholder, they have their own interests, so that can, if we cannot handle that properly, that can, at the end of the day, compromise the integrity of the study. Yeah, the panel has been talking for about 30 minutes, but we would love to, hear your voice, your comments, questions from the audience. Clinical operations is a very big topic, and it's very experience-driven. So we would like, to have your experience, have you share your opinion. And anybody from the audience? Yeah. Okay.
It's late in the day. Probably everyone is looking forward to go home or wait for the dinner later. Michael, you have probably something to challenge us, I'm sure.
No questions. No, I just wanted to thank the panel. If there's no questions. Great, so I'll just wrap it up. So just some concluding comments. I'll stand here. I know it's been a long day, but I think a very absorbing one. So I wanted to just take 4 or 5 minutes to just summarize it very quickly. We kicked off the day with the discussion around the importance of strategic partnerships and collaborations. And Bhavani Sivalingam of Quintiles informed us that it is possible to form successful strategic partnerships, underlining the importance of good governance and adhering to clearly defined KPIs. We had Sam Azule of Pfizer tell us that India and China, while challenging clinical trial destinations, are largely viable and are now included almost by default in clinical development programs. Dr. Ken Lee of PRA presented a compelling argument for the inclusion of Southeast Asia as a clinical trials destination, including the levels of support from government, particularly in countries like Korea, Malaysia, Singapore, together with obviously infrastructure and patient availability. After lunch, we had Graham Bunn of Medidata inform us that 15 to 30% of clinical trial data on any single protocol is largely unutilized. And so he showed the significant cost reductions which can be achieved by implementing, by eliminating non-essential data through very clear and ideal optimal protocol design. Dr. Ong Myo of GSK Bio explored strategies for identifying the right experts in your oncology clinical development programs from the multidisciplinary team. We had Malcolm Burgess of ICON present an argument that showed that it is possible to increase protocol compliance through the use of technology. Stanley So of World Courier highlighted that successful cold chain management extends beyond packaging. And then our final speaker before the panel, Ms. Janet Brennan, articulated the evolution of the industry through various business models and highlighting the challenges associated with achieving efficiency and scalability while managing sponsor control. And finally, we had a very absorbing discussion from the panel, very healthy discussion between the build versus outsource versus embedded options, concluding that I guess the heading was correct. There is no one size fits all. Underlining the importance of quality and technology beyond merely considering cost. And so I know this is not a very comprehensive summary of the day's events, but I think all in all, very, very informative. So thank you for your participation, and thank you to the speakers for very well thought out presentations and preparations for the panel. Thank you.